I thought I was the predator in the room until the man in the faded hoodie laid a file on my desk that turned my entire life into a crime scene. In 3 minutes, my mahogany paneled empire collapsed, and I realized I had just insulted the one person with the power to bury me for decades. The mahogany desk in my office was polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the arrogance I had cultivated over 20 years in high stakes finance. I prided myself on my ability to read people within the first 3 seconds of a meeting. My judgment was my currency, and today, my currency was devalued by the man standing in front of my desk. He didn't look like the kind of client we usually courted at Sterling and Cross. He was dressed in a faded hoodie and work-worn jeans, his shoes caked with the remnants of a construction site. I didn't even look up from my laptop when he approached. I simply raised a hand, palm outward, signaling for him to stop. "Sir," I said, my voice dripping with the practiced indifference that usually made people retreat, "the lobby is for actual account holders. If you're looking for a personal loan or a handout, the community branch is 3 blocks down. We don't handle retail inquiries here." I heard a soft, controlled exhale. He didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. The audacity of it made me look up, my eyes narrowing. I was about to call security to have him dragged out for his insolence when he placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio on my desk. It wasn't a loan application, it was an audit report, and it was marked with a seal that made my stomach drop into my shoes. "I'm not here for a loan, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly cold. "I'm here because your branch has been flagged by the Internal Audit Committee for a series of highly irregular transactions. Transactions that involve a massive organized scheme meant to launder assets under the guise of private wealth management." You've been very clever, haven't you? Thinking that if you only deal with the right kind of people, nobody would ever look closely at your ledgers. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands, usually steady as a surgeon's, began to tremble beneath the mahogany surface. How did he know about the accounts in the Cayman Islands? How could this man, who looked like he'd been digging ditches all morning, have access to files that were buried under 3 layers of digital encryption and protected by a firewall that cost the firm 6 figures a year? "You're mistaken," I stammered, my mouth feeling like it was filled with cotton. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're trespassing on private property. This is a secure facility. If you don't leave, I will have you escorted out by the authorities. I'll make sure you're facing a heavy, serious accusation for attempting to breach our security." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the portfolio. He looked me dead in the eye, and for the first time in my career, I felt small. I felt like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "The authorities?" he chuckled, a hollow, mirthless sound. "Mr. Vance, I suggest you take a very close look at the document on page 4. Take a look at the signature line under the beneficial owner section. Then tell me who exactly is in a position to be escorted out of this building." I reached for the portfolio, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I flipped the pages, my vision blurring. My eyes landed on the bottom of a legal document that defined the entirety of the Sterling and Cross Holding Company. There, in bold, black ink, was a name I recognized, a name that was supposedly synonymous with the elusive phantom majority shareholder who had bought the bank in a secret acquisition 6 months ago. I looked at the document, then back at the man in the hoodie. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just talking to a client I had insulted. I was staring at the man who held the power to destroy my entire life with a single phone call. And as I stared at the signature, a notification pinged on my laptop. It was an email from the board of directors marked "Urgent, immediate suspension pending internal review." I looked up to find him watching me with a predator's patience, and suddenly, the office door clicked shut, locked from the outside. The click of the door lock echoed in the silence like a gunshot. I stood up, my chair screeching against the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed agonizingly loud in the sudden vacuum of the room. My heart was a frantic drumbeat in my ears, drowning out the ambient hum of the office beyond. I looked at the door, then back at the man, the owner, whose gaze was as immovable as a mountain. "What is this?" I managed to rasp, though my throat felt like it had been scraped with sandpaper. This is a misunderstanding. I have a protocol. I have to protect the privacy of the high net worth individuals. And your appearance, sir, it didn't fit the profile. It's bank policy. He didn't blink. He stood up slowly, unfolding his frame until he towered over the desk. He didn't look like a construction worker anymore. He looked like a titan of industry reclaiming his territory. Policy, he repeated, the word tasting like ash. You speak of policy while you've been diverting millions into an organized scheme that was designed to bypass every regulatory check we have in place. You didn't screen me because you care about policy, Vance. You screened me because you wanted to ensure the person sitting in that chair was someone you could manipulate, someone who wouldn't ask questions about the missing capital. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small encrypted drive, and set it on the desk. You haven't been running a bank. You've been running a front. You were so confident in your influence that you didn't even notice the board had installed a shadow audit team months ago. Do you know what happens to people who use their positions to facilitate the movement of packages with suspicious substances? Do you know how the Service of Internal Verification deals with those who facilitate illicit activity? I felt the walls closing in. The mahogany desk, once a symbol of my status, now felt like a barricade between me and a lifetime of ruin. I had buried those records deep, scrubbed the logs, and paid off 3 mid-level managers. I thought I was untouchable. I didn't move any prohibited items, I blurted out, the panic making me reckless. That wasn't me. I just managed the accounts. I was following orders from the regional director. I was just a cog in the wheel. The man let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. A cog? No, Mr. Vance. You are the grease. And when the machine stops, the grease gets wiped off. He tapped the encrypted drive. Every transaction, every offshore wire, every conversation you had on your encrypted phone. It's all here. I've already sent a copy to the Service of Internal Verification. They are currently downstairs, clearing out your office, seizing your assets, and preparing to hand you over to the authorities for a formal investigation into the organized scheme you've managed. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the desk edge to keep them from flailing. I could see the lobby through the glass wall of my office. People were moving, but it wasn't the usual rhythm of the bank. Security guards I didn't recognize were standing at the entrances. The tellers weren't processing deposits, they were being led into the conference room. My world was disintegrating in real time, all because I had judged a man by his hoodie instead of the authority he commanded. Please, I whispered, the arrogance completely stripped away. I can give you names. I can give you the details on the regional director, the offshore contacts, everything. Just don't hand me over. If I'm linked to the organized scheme, I'll be looking at decades in a cage. My life will be over. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. I could smell the faint scent of concrete dust and expensive cologne, a juxtaposition that told me he had come straight from the field to deliver the coup de grace. You didn't offer the truth when you had the chance, Vance. You offered me insults. You tried to leverage your position to bully a man you deemed inferior. He reached out and grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward the door. But you're right about one thing. You are a valuable asset to someone. The people above you, they won't let you talk. Do you really think they'll let you reach the authorities alive? He unlocked the door and pushed it open. I looked out into the hallway, expecting to see the police, but instead, I saw 2 men in gray suits walking toward my office. They weren't police. They were men I knew, men who worked for the regional director, men who were known to handle problems. The owner of the bank looked at me, a cryptic glint in his eye, and whispered, "They aren't here to save you, Vance, and neither am I." The air in the hallway felt like liquid nitrogen, cold enough to burn. The 2 men in gray suits were approaching with the calculated, rhythmic gait of predators closing in on a wounded animal. I knew those suits. I knew the men inside them. They were the regional director's fixers, the ones who handled the mess when a deal went sour or a subordinate became a liability. They weren't here to audit books. They were here to ensure that I never had the chance to testify about the organized scheme. My breath hitched. I looked back at the bank owner, the man I had so arrogantly dismissed. He remained perfectly still, his silhouette framed by the golden afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. He didn't look worried. He looked disappointed, as if he were watching a test subject fail a basic survival experiment. "They're coming for the drive," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sudden deafening roar of my own pulse. "They think I have the proof, and if they find out I've given it to you, they'll kill me before I even hit the lobby." The man leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly hum that somehow cut through the rising panic in my chest. "Then you better start running, Vance. You've spent years profiting from the misery of others, looking the other way while our accounts were used to funnel capital into illicit channels. You thought you were the predator, but you were just the bait. Now you have exactly 10 seconds to decide if you want to be a martyr for a regional director who has already signed your death warrant, or if you want to survive long enough to face the service of internal verification." He shoved a small, heavy object into my hand. It was a key fob to a sedan parked in the underground garage, followed by a crumpled note with an address that didn't appear on any company map. "That location is where the federal team is waiting. If you make it there, you get a plea deal. If you don't, well, I suspect the men in the suits will make sure your end is quiet and accidental." The footsteps in the corridor stopped. A heavy gloved hand landed on the brass handle of my office door. The metal groaned under the pressure. I looked at the owner of the bank, desperate for a shred of pity, but found only the cold, hard logic of a man who dealt in risks and returns. "Go," he commanded, gesturing toward the back entrance of my office, a private fire exit I used for my own illicit departures. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted over the mahogany desk, knocking over a display of awards I had spent years earning, awards that now felt like gravestones. I sprinted for the door, my heart screaming. Behind me, the office door swung open with a violent crash. I heard a voice, cold, familiar, and utterly lethal, slice through the air. "Vance, stop right there. You've been a loyal servant, but loyalty has an expiration date, and yours is currently 2 seconds past due." I burst through the fire exit into the stairwell, my dress shoes slipping on the industrial concrete. I took the stairs 3 at a time, the echo of my panicked breathing sounding like a siren in the concrete shaft. I could hear them behind me, boots thudding against the metal steps. They weren't running. They were closing the distance with the predatory confidence of men who knew the layout of the building better than I did. I reached the bottom level, the door to the garage looming ahead. I pushed it open, blinded by the flickering fluorescent lights of the parking level. I scrambled toward the spot indicated on the key fob. A black sedan sat alone in the shadows, its engine cold. I fumbled with the fob, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. I finally heard the lock click, a sound that, for once in my life, brought relief. But as I pulled the door open, the headlights of another vehicle swept across the garage, pinning me against the frame of my escape car. I turned, shielding my eyes from the blinding glare. A black SUV idled just 20 feet away, its engine growling. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. The regional director himself. He wasn't holding a weapon, but the look on his face was far worse. He looked at me with a terrifyingly calm smile, holding up his phone to reveal he was already on a call. "Drop the keys, Vance," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You really think he let you leave that office because he wanted to save you? You're not being rescued. You're being delivered." Before I could process his words, a siren began to wail, not from the police, but from the alarm system of the bank itself. The garage doors began to seal shut, trapping me in the dark, cavernous space with the man who had ordered my destruction. And then, from the shadows behind me, I heard the metallic click of a weapon being readied. The sound of the metallic slide locking into place vibrated through the cold, stagnant air of the parking garage, a mechanical reminder that my life was no longer my own. I stood paralyzed, one hand on the handle of the sedan, the other still clutching the key fob that had promised salvation. The regional director, a man whose tailored suits usually hid a predatory nature, now moved with the fluid, calculated grace of a hunter finishing his work. "You were always the weakest link, Vance," he said, stepping into the dim light. His eyes weren't looking at me, but at the empty space behind me, where the shadows seemed to pulse with movement. "You thought you were a partner in this organized scheme. You were just a temporary storage vessel for the evidence we couldn't afford to keep on our own servers. Did you really think the owner was your ally? He's the one who authorized your removal, the moment you became a liability to the board. I felt the blood leave my extremities. Everything the man had said in my office, the talk of audits, the talk of the service of internal verification, it all suddenly twisted into a new, darker shape. Was I being set up to be the fall guy? The one who took the weight of the massive, illegal transactions while the true orchestrators walked away clean? You're lying, I shouted, though my voice cracked, betraying the terror clawing at my throat. I have the drive. I have the records of everything. The director chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. That drive? Look at what's in your hand, Vance. I looked down, my palm was sweating, and as I gripped the fob, I realized it felt lighter than it had seconds ago. I flipped it over. The casing was cracked, and the micro SD card that should have been nestled inside was missing. It had fallen out in my desperate scramble down the stairs. It was gone, lost somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of the building, leaving me with nothing but a worthless piece of plastic and my own incompetence. See, the director sighed, checking his watch as if he had a dinner reservation to get to. You have no leverage. You have no protection. And now, you're just a man with nowhere to run, standing in a basement with the people you've been trying to frame. The shadow behind me shifted. A figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Not one of the men in gray suits, but a woman. She was holding a suppressed firearm, the muzzle pointed casually at my chest. I recognized her instantly. She was the head of security, the woman I had personally hired 2 years ago to keep this facility impenetrable. She had been on the payroll all along, a silent sentinel for the very criminal network I thought I was only tangentially involved with. He's right, Arthur, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. You are a convenient shield, but your time is up. We have to clear the board, and unfortunately for you, your presence here is a variable we can no longer control. I backed away, hitting the side of the sedan. The escape route was blocked. The steel garage doors were fully lowered now, humming with an electric current that meant no one was getting in or out. I was trapped in a concrete box, surrounded by the very people I had helped build an empire of illicit wealth. I can give you more, I pleaded, my back pressing against the cold metal of the car door. I know about the offshore accounts in the Pacific. I know the codes. If you kill me, you'll never be able to access those funds. The accounts are biometrically locked to my profile. The director paused. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, a momentary hesitation that was the only lifeline I had left. He looked at the woman with the weapon. She didn't lower it, but her finger eased slightly off the trigger. Is he telling the truth? She asked, her gaze cutting into me. Yes, I swear, I screamed. I diverted the final tranche to a secondary wallet that only I can access. If I don't trigger the daily authentication protocol within the next hour, the funds are purged. You'll lose it all. Everything you've worked for. Gone. The director stepped closer, his expression unreadable. He reached into his coat and pulled out a tablet, his eyes blazing with a mix of greed and fury. You have 60 minutes, Vance. You will log in, you will transfer those funds to our secure ledger, and then we will see if we can find a way to make your disappearance look like a quiet, voluntary retirement. But if you try to trigger a silent alarm or flag a trace on the network, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He gestured to the woman who stepped up beside me, the barrel of her weapon now pressed firmly against my ribs. Get in the car, she commanded. I fumbled with the handle and slid into the driver's seat. As I reached for the ignition, a flicker of light caught my eye in the rearview mirror. It wasn't the overhead lights. It was a digital screen mounted on the dashboard of the car, a hidden camera feed from the boardroom upstairs. I saw the bank owner, the man in the hoodie, watching me. He was sitting at the head of the table, a headset on, listening to every word we were saying. He wasn't just watching, he was recording. And then he looked directly into the camera lens, smiled, and pressed a single button on his console that caused the garage to plunge into total, absolute darkness. The sudden absolute darkness in the garage felt like the world had been erased. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing and the soft, electric hum of the car's dashboard. Then, the silence was shattered. From the darkness, a voice projected from the speakers of my car, the same voice that had set this entire game in motion. It was the bank owner. Mr. Vance, Your time for cooperation has expired. Your associates have been recorded, their confessions broadcasted to the service of internal verification, and, quite frankly, they've lost their bargaining power. Before the director or the security head could react, a series of blinding, high-intensity strobe lights embedded in the garage pillars ignited, turning the concrete chamber into a disorienting, white-hot void. The woman beside me screamed, her hands slipping from her weapon as she clawed at her eyes, blinded by the sudden surge of intensity. The director, caught in the open, collapsed to his knees, his hands shielding his face. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching against the polished concrete as I tore backward, smashing through the low-hanging barrier of the secure zone. The garage doors, which had been locked down by the director, suddenly retracted with a violent mechanical groan. At the opening, I didn't see the police. I saw an entire tactical unit, led by the internal audit team, swarming the entrance with overwhelming force. I slammed on the brakes, the sedan coming to a shuddering halt inches from the lead officer's boots. I put my hands out the window, every muscle in my body shaking, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. They dragged me out, but they didn't treat me like a criminal. They treated me like the most valuable witness in a century. The aftermath was a blur of interviews, evidence gathering, and the systematic dismantling of an organized scheme that had tainted every level of the institution. My involvement, my complicity in the back office maneuvering wasn't ignored, but my cooperation turned the tide. The director and his network were taken into custody, facing decades in a cage for their roles in the illicit flow of substances and capital. The banker who had visited my office was not just a billionaire. He was an undercover operative working for the Oversight Committee, sent to find the one person desperate enough to trade the truth for a second chance. Months later, I sat in a small, quiet cafe far from the glitz and predatory pulse of the financial district. I was no longer a banker. I had forfeited everything: the status, the wealth, the mahogany desk. I was living under a new identity, working a job that involved actual labor, just as the man in the hoodie had once suggested. My life was simple, quiet, and for the first time in years, completely clean. The door to the cafe opened, and a man walked in. He was wearing a simple, nondescript jacket, but I recognized his gait, the way he moved with the calm, terrifying certainty of someone who held the world's secrets in his pockets. He didn't look at me at first, just ordered a black coffee and sat at the table next to mine. "You look different, Arthur," he said, his voice low, without turning his head. "I feel different," I replied, staring out the window at the morning traffic. I spent my life thinking I was the one pulling the strings. I thought I could measure a person by their clothes or their net worth. I learned the hard way that the most dangerous man in the room is usually the one everyone else overlooks. He finally looked at me, a faint ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "You were a useful conduit for a necessary cleanup. You were greedy, arrogant, and blind to the world around you. But you did the one thing that mattered when the walls closed in. You chose to stop hiding." He stood up, leaving a crisp envelope on the table before walking toward the door. "The investigation is closed. The board has been reconstituted. Don't look for your old life, Arthur. It doesn't exist anymore. Just keep your head down and stay honest. The world has enough predators. It doesn't need another one." He left as quietly as he had arrived. I waited until he was gone, then opened the envelope. Inside was nothing but a single blank piece of paper and a small key. It wasn't a bank key, and it wasn't a threat. It was a simple key to a storage locker, a reminder that while my past was gone, the consequences of my choices would always be locked away, waiting for me to remember them. I left the envelope on the table, walked out into the cool morning air, and for the first time in my life, I walked toward a future I hadn't bought with someone else's misery. The story of the banker who refused the wrong man ended there, not with a payout, but with the quiet, humbling realization that the only thing of value I had ever truly owned was my integrity, and I had finally gotten it back.